Ever since 9/11, Americans have given more power and more money to our many intelligence agencies. They can now monitor your communications or spy on you. There's very little oversight for any of it. They just have to see you as a threat. This requires a great deal of trust from the public. Do they deserve our trust? Well, not always, it turns out. Senior intelligence officials equaled or exceeded clueless journalists in some cases in their willingness to believe the Russia story.
That this is nothing short of treasonous because it is a betrayal of the nation. He is giving aid and comfort to the enemy.
Is there influence, whether witting or unwitting, by the Russians over President Trump? And you know, in the intervening year and a half or so, you know, his behavior hasn't done much, at least in my mind, to allay that concern.
I don't know whether the current president of the United States was with prostitutes peeing on each other in Moscow in 2013. It's possible, but I don't know.
People you just watched pretty recently led the most powerful agencies in the federal government. How did they get those jobs? John Gentry spent more than a decade at CIA. He's thought a lot about this question, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Gentry, thanks very much for coming on. So you just saw the man who most recently ran CIA saying that because he didn't like the president's public press conference with the Russian leader, the president had committed, quote, treason. That seems so reckless to me that my first thought was, how did a guy like that wind up running CIA?
Well, of course, he was appointed by President Carter, or President Obama.
Close.
President Obama, excuse me, and was approved. He was a White House person who the president liked. It's the president's prerogative to name people like that.
So CIA and also the FBI and NSA and military intelligence, all these agencies are filled with smart, serious people. What do they think as they watch this guy define the agency's reputation through his cable news hysteria?
Well, this is a fundamentally new phenomenon. For many years, the culture at CIA and elsewhere in the intelligence community was that current and former officials kept their personal political views at home. So they were expected to have political opinions, but they kept them at home.
Yes.
And former senior officials who wrote memoirs wrote them in relatively objective kinds of ways, even when they had very difficult relationships with presidents.
Right.
So there were over time lots and lots of examples of difficult relationships. Usually the intelligence people said, we're subservient here. We work for the president. We're going to bite our tongues. We're going to try to make this work. So in 2016, though, you had a fundamentally different situation. You had a case where senior officials said, I believe that Mr. Trump is wrong on issues, and I'm going public to criticize him. So a fundamentally
But that's an attack on democracy by definition, because CIA, every person in the executive branch serves at the pleasure of the one person who's elected by voters. You can't operate independently.
Well, this is potentially a deep state situation. It's a term that's being used now for the first time in the U.S. political context. You talk about Turkey and Thailand.
Do you think it's accurate?
Well, I think it's a question that we should be thinking about. I don't have a firm view on it yet, but we're at the point where we ought to be thinking about it.
So if you were running CIA, wouldn't you be afraid that Congress would clip your wings? I mean, if Democrats take over, why would they want an agency that's shown itself to be willing to try and overthrow a president? Why would they want an agency like that to continue to exist?
Well, much of the CIA in particular now has evolved into, generally speaking, a left-leaning organization. And so I think an open question is does the Democratic Party want to go back to the roots of having a thoroughly objective intelligence community?
So it gives them more power. So basically, once you politicize these agencies, how long before they so completely politicize the United States military that there's no power center in American life that's not controlled by the left?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question, but I'm not sure I have an answer to that one.
When did this happen? When you worked at CIA, was it a left organization?
When I was there in the 1980s, there were probably a majority of liberals. I think that's probably the case. But the ethic was that one's politics stayed at home, and one was expected to be objective in the workforce. Right. And there was a process that we call the review process, which was designed to excise political bias as well as incompetence, basically. Well, over time, that culture pretty clearly has changed.
Clearly. Last question. Since you know how much power these agencies have, does it make you nervous that they're so politicized?
Well, my main concern about the politicization at this point is that because it's so critical for effective intelligence to enjoy the trust of senior decision makers, that the fairly overt politicization by both senior leaders and also apparently a number of people in the workforce, is evidenced by comments by some of the leaders as well as leaks and so on, that these people are damaging the trust of presidents and of the people. So what that means in essence is that we've got the potential for self-inflicted trust-related damage.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a long time before, as an observer, I could ever trust these people. Mr. Gentry, thank you for that.
Thank you.
It was really interesting and sad.